We are continuing with our series on 10 things about pianos that you should know before purchase or considering. We've already done the Kawai manufactured pianos, and today we're going to focus on the Steinway Sons 10 things you should know about Steinway Sons pianos. Hi, this is Ted with Alamo Music Center in downtown San Antonio, Texas.
And I'm Patrick Marr. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, please check out our other YouTube channels, our other videos. Leave us comments, subscribe to our content, sign up for notifications. We love to interact with you guys. Ted, so 10 things I need to know before buying a Steinway.
We're going to have you informed. That's a good way to look at it. 10 things.
It's ambitious, if you will. We've already dissected Kawai. We went back. If you haven't seen that video and you're ever interested in Kawai, please go and check out that video. 10 things you need to know before buying one. I love the history of pianos. It's super fascinating to get in and start looking at the nitty-gritty of how this company became who they are today, and a lot of these characteristics that brands are known for.
Absolutely. It's hard to talk about any kind of history of piano without mentioning Steinway. Of course, that's always like the crown and the jewel of the conversation. And when you go back through the history books, you can see that they were actually there.
Yeah,
and it's kind of interesting.
It's incredible. So we'll start right at it. It's 10 things you need to know, and the first one is, as we both alluded to, history. The history of Steinway is an incredible journey of piano, and where it started from was back in Germany. And you think of Steinway, you think, oh, this is that American company that has the piano industry all bowing before them.
It's funny because they have these kind of small introductory roots to the piano, because they actually started off making components for the piano, making like just the hammers, just the action, just the keys, and then they moved into other components of the piano when they were mostly being made by furniture makers at that time. So the finer skilled parts is what they kind of excelled at. They built for a number of piano manufacturers.
And it's interesting because you look back at the family. So they weren't even called the Steinway family. It was Steinweg.
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 Right.
Okay, there you go. The German way to say it. But they were in the 1820s. We're talking about how many years ago is that?
That's
200. Is my math correct?
Ago.
That's 200 years ago in the 1820s. Steinweg.
And that's only 20, 25 years after the really true invention of the piano. And still at that time, some things weren't invented on the piano yet.
And so early on, he moves to New York. I guess it's in the 1840s. So you fast forward about 20 years of making parts and making pianos. And he makes this journey to New York and really wants to make a company there that honors the piano manufacturing of Europe and of Germany. And so he starts a company in Manhattan in 1853, I think is the year actually.
I think that's when they first moved their site. Before then, they had about, I think it was 8 to 12 different sites. One site would make keys, another site would make soundboard. Then they would kind of move it down the line to where they had an assembly room where they didn't build anything, but all the components were brought together, and they came together. And it was around that time that they moved the factory, I believe, to Manhattan. They built a single factory.
Okay. So in 1853, you get the Manhattan, or Steinway is started. It doesn't actually get the name Steinway until about 64 is what we were reading about, when they kind of rebrand to be, an American company.
They took the European part out of their name.
Or the German part, yeah. It was
Heinrich Steinweg became Henry Steinway.
And so Henry Steinway is a very well-known name in the piano world, and just an incredible story. You see Steinway and Sons on these pianos, and you just immediately are drawn to, okay, this is a cool quality instrument that has rich history that branches outside of the musical world. People who don't know anything about pianos know Steinway.
You're right. And you mentioned that 1864 date, and that was around the time when they first started to bring their square pianos to expositions, and they started to get a lot of notification.
And so lots of accolades, lots of awards all the way through the 1800s, and of course moving into the 1900s. But just really incredible. The history of Steinway is something, and we're just scratching the surface here. But there's so much rich history there that's really the modern piano has a lot to thank from the patents, from these inventions that happened with Steinway, and really in those golden age that they refer to this golden age of Steinways. And we'll get there. Just hinting at the golden age of Steinway. But just this incredible, rich history where they really did kind of innovate a musical instrument that we all love today. Which brings us to number 2. the power of marketing.
Power of marketing, well, back then it moved a little bit slower, but they were way ahead of the marketing game. And a lot of that came from talk from the exposition appearances of their pianos and long lines for people to check out the pianos. And also the one thing people liked was the volume, the tone, and the ability for a Steinway piano to always perform and not fall apart. That really used to be a problem with pianos falling apart.
Well, these were all very hand-built instruments, and back then they were just inventing things like the assembly line and these technologies. They really kind of slowly progressed because it was such a craftsman thing to do and to slowly build. And I was reading the numbers are crazy. They made their 100,000th piano in 1903. By I think it was like the 1940s, they were already up to 300,000. And then in the 80s, it was already up to about half a million. And so you just see this like momentum start, and it doesn't really slow down. And they had a product offering that people loved, and the marketing kind of followed the product at that point. And it's incredible because you look at in the 80s, I think 80s or early 90s, it was CBS. And so the CBS years, CBS bought Fender. They tried to make this musical conglomerate almost. They had bought Fender, they bought Rhodes, they bought an organ company, and they actually owned the Yankees at some point.
As well as Steinway pianos.
And then they owned Steinway, so they made an offering at Steinway, and it's just incredible that's how big the branding is behind a piano, behind Steinway's name. And then later you move on and it's Selmer, Con Selmer, who's a band manufacturer. They make band instruments. Selmer Industries in '95 bought Steinway, and they renamed their whole company Steinway. And so they realized the power and the marketing dynamics that Steinway has, how much draw that has. Mm-hmm. And I think that leads to some of these exorbitant prices.
Sure.
In the Steinway world, but it just has such a powerful grasp that like a company acquired Steinway to rebrand their whole entire image as we're Steinway musical instruments, and we have Con Selmer and we have these other brands, but really the head of the name we want people to see is Steinway. And just very cool. But yeah, so I want to talk about the power of marketing, and that moves us to our third point too here. The third thing you need to know about Steinway is the family of Steinway, and I don't mean Henry Steinway.
Or Theodore, the one that has all the patents and stuff like that. The family of Steinway, you're talking about the Steinway Sons particular brand piano, and then that would also include the Boston pianos, and then of course the Essex line. Mm-hmm. And those collection, that family of pianos, are tiered for what Steinway calls pre-Steinway, and then a different type of beginners would begin on an Essex piano, and then more experienced players, professionals would go to the Bostons if they chose that, and their premier piano would be their Steinway Sons.
And it's interesting because you think of back to our last point. You think of the power of marketing and this giant brand they're building, and the price just keeps going up with that prestige that they love to talk about. And they had to, in the 90s, they had to diversify, and they had to say, hey, not everyone can afford this.
Right.
But we have such a powerful grasp on the piano industry. What if we made a mid-tier product, and what if we made an affordable product? And it's interesting to look at who makes those pianos.
Well, the Boston piano was one that Steinway actually designed, and they went out and they had a choice of a builder, and then they went out and tried to select their choice builder, and they ended up with Kawai, which is what they originally wanted. And I've played a number of those Bostons, and I have a few friends that are professional players that have Bostons and do recordings on them, and they're wonderful pianos. I've never heard anyone that has a Boston complain about it. They rave about it. They like them more than they do Steinways.
No, I mean it's amazing that it's branded under the Steinway umbrella. But it's almost a completely different beast, that Boston. And when you look at Kawai, a lot of people compare Kawai, Yamaha, and Steinway as these players. But then Kawai is also manufacturing for Steinway, and they have the Boston. So Boston's a great piano. The Essex, they did go after a manufacturer with that, and it was actually Young Chang for a long time. And eventually they had to switch over to Pearl River.
Again, because of some of the cost. The manufacturing the pianos in Korea was getting a little expensive, and so they moved to the Chinese Indonesian manufacturing market.
Yeah, so just interesting that the Steinway family, and they actually market this as you can always trade in your Essex for a Boston, you can always trade in your Boston for a Steinway, and you can kind of go on this journey with us through our Steinway family.
Growth.
Yeah. And so it's very interesting. But yeah, so we want to definitely go over the Steinway family, which brings us to our next point. Know your options.
This is interesting because you could get either a brand new Steinway or a used Steinway.
And it's funny because they make Essex, they make Boston. These are affordable options for people, or they're less expensive than a Steinway, so they're moderately affordable. But then know your options on the market.
Well, here's what I can tell you about the market. There are more Steinway Sons pianos for sale than there are Boston and Essex. It's probably put together. So that tells you something about the quality of the Boston and Essex pianos amongst those owners. They're happy. They don't want to get rid of them. And if they do trade them in, they're probably going to trade them in for a Steinway. But half of the fun of a Steinway piano is trying to get a little partake in that history and a little partake in that family. And that's where the used market comes in, because there really isn't an age limitation on a Steinway used piano. And we have sold some that go back to 1870, and they were incredibly expensive pianos. They've been remanufactured or not just repainted and made to look nice. I mean, they're actually redone, brand new hammers, strings, all the kind of stuff. And Steinway does that as well to their own pianos. They'll remanufacture them.
And without a doubt, we carry a lot of used pianos, but without a doubt, Steinway is the one that you'll see a piano from the 20s or from the 1910s, and it will already have work done to it. People have made these investments throughout the years, and they've said, hey, let's maybe put a little work into that Steinway. Let's get a tech out here, maybe restring it. Let's get some new hammers. And people are more willing than ever, I think, to spend on the Steinway because they think of it as an investment. I think it's marketed as an investment.
Well, a lot of my favorite artists go and find these 19 or teens or 20 Steinways. Sometimes they're stories, a farmhouse, a barn, and they completely redo that piano and use that not only as their home and studio piano, but that's the one that they make all their recordings off.
There's countless debates online of, this tier of Steinways from 1920s to 1940s is the golden age, or this to stay away from the late 60s because they were using Teflon. Is that what?
They had some kind of Teflon component
in the action, and so some people say avoid those at all costs, and so it's just funny and neat to see the used market and the new market compete with each other. And I've heard Steinways from a lot of from the prestigious Steinway dealers. They really are. I mean, they have to push their product, if you will, and they make a great product. But they'll say, these things that we told you were investments are now Steinways, and they kind of hint at Steinways because it used to be a Steinway. And so if you get conflicting information where you look, and the piano forums are full of debates on whether to shop new for a Steinway or whether to shop used, because there is such a great availability and you get a better price on a used one. And
Absolutely.
It plays like a new piano with new parts from Steinway. And it's incredible to see how much output there is of that used Steinway market. Because you said it, people hold on to these.
They hold on to them for the tone, for they sound better as they age, the aging soundboards, and that's why people prefer the older ones, because they want part of that history. They want to feel like they own a classic grandeur of a grand piano.
And harkening back to that marketing, it's a status of symbols to have something in your house. Why would you ever get rid of that?
Oh, absolutely.
So just incredible. And I love that you're saying how your artist friends will go and hunt after these Steinways, because that brings us to our next point, the piano bank, the Steinway piano bank.
They got 250 pianos worldwide artists have access to for performance, for rehearsing, and for recording.
So these artists can say, hey, I'm gonna be playing in New York. Can I come look at the piano bank because I want to select the perfect 7-foot piano? And so they probably have 12 ready to go for you, and more in different locations. And you can always get that as a Steinway artist?
Well, the piano bank is something that actually grew out of their original marketing plan by having the Steinway Hall, so they could have appearances and they could have performances there. But then Steinway also kind of created the first, world-class celebrity on piano when they brought over Paderewski and he played Steinway pianos, and that he was their first in-advertisement guy that endorsed their pianos, and that's part of that history, it's part of that family, and it's part of the piano bank, because that's something that every artist goes through. There's even a novel written about a specific serial number, that you follow this 9-foot concert grant all the way through the Steinway factory, and then years later, who picks it up, who plays it, what performances, who premiered it. It's really an interesting story.
You just reminded me too. One of the funniest things about Steinway is the first Steinway piano made was number 423, because number 422 had been made. He had made 422 in Germany when he was still making there. So it's incredible. These serial numbers have history. We have one here in San Antonio that was sold to a Russian czar back in the turn of the century. It's just incredible how much history and how much they have a Steinway archives where you can go and figure out information of who originally bought this. Where did it go? Especially with the more ornate ones and these beautiful
carvings.
And it attracts, I think it attracts people who are piano lovers to go seek it.
It does, because it gives, again, it gives the history, and it gives the prestige of ownership. These were things that at one time, the first pianos were only owned by nobles and kings and lords, and so from there it grew as a sophisticated item of wealth and all these other kind of things. But it actually did take a lot of time and attention to perfect playing.
And I think they've done a great job of spreading the word about Steinway and saying, hey, look at all these people who played it. Look at where these have been. Look at what we've created, and really brings us to our next one naturally, but. They have this prestige in the universities and in the schools. There's this term that school districts and the music departments all know about. They all know about this. It's All Steinway Schools. And what a powerful thing.
It does. It says that what that basically says is there's not a bad piano in a place.
And there's criteria to be an All Steinway school, and I think they get a discount for it, but they have to be 90% or more Steinway manufactured instruments. So that can be part of that Essex line, or it could be part of that Boston line. But really, I don't want to say twisting the arm of these universities, but they're saying, look, if you want a good deal on these, buy a whole bunch of them from us. And it's a powerful thing, because when you think of prestige on a piano stage, a lot of the times your mind naturally goes to, what are they playing on stage? What is that beautiful 9-foot piano? And for many, 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 many years, almost 100% of them are Steinway pianos.
And you have to think about what that says to their potential student base, too, in terms of marketing. It's like, hey, man, it's All Steinway School. Like, they take their piano studies very serious, and that's where I want to go to school to study, because it seems like they really have a serious program.
And they've started this program. It's been around for so many years. I think one of the first schools was like in Ohio, and they've been doing it since 1877. And have been an All Steinway school this whole time. And it's powerful, because you realize how powerful the name Steinway is. The faculty changes, piano players change, preferences change, but this All Steinway idea is
It doesn't have anything to do with the United States, because the minute you leave here and you go to Europe, and people will immediately mention Steinway as their favorite pianos. The same thing in foreign countries when you go there. The exception might be in Japan, because they manufacture some great pianos there, but they are well aware of Steinway, and they know that Steinway is the one that everyone has to build to compete against.
Yeah, and so they've continuously made this product. There's a ton of it available on the used market, on rebuild markets. We see about 50 of them a year come and trickle in through here, and a lot of them will sometimes do some work on and sometimes get them out of here. But just really cool instruments. When you play them, you really feel like the history is there. And everyone has a little different characteristics. I've played really amazing Steinways. I've played some okay Steinways. And it's incredible when you look at it, you're like, oh, but this is from the 1920s. And you're like, it's a pretty good piano for being from the 1920s. So the prestige of Steinway, that All Steinway University, and you look at, again, at the concert halls around the world, and I would say the majority still have a Steinway as their concert piano on the stage, that they're going to play with the symphonies, that the piano player from around the world is going to come through and they're going to play on this Steinway because they know the Steinway. And it's
bragging rights for the venue. It's an attraction for the venue to say we have one of the better, if not the best, manufactured piano in the world, and here it is.
And I think that brings us to our next one. Number 7 on the list is investment. This is a tricky subject, isn't it?
It is a tricky subject, and because there are actually better times to buy a piano than at others, but you're not aware of them at the time that you're out to try to make it. It's like buying anything else. But the one thing about Steinway piano is that it will, over time, it should maintain its investment. It should maintain its that's the whole idea, is that when you buy a Steinway piano, it'll stay worth what it is, if not appreciate, which is something that they try to brag on. But if you could stick around 150 years to get the appreciation out of your piano, it would be great, but most of us don't.
Exactly. They have so heavily focused on the investment part of your instrument, of the Steinway. That's part of the narrative with Steinway. When you buy a Steinway, it's not for you, it's for future generations.
Right.
They have this strong narrative, but the price, if that instrument lasts that long, they're only selling a couple of these every year.
Right.
And so the price really gets tagged along with that marketing, and be prepared to spend close to 6 figures on a piano.
Sure.
And that just not blink an eye because you're saying, oh, I wanted a Steinway though, I want it new. It's one of those things where a lot of parents and a lot of piano players will say, well, what's the safest investment for me? And I think for many years, and the narrative is Steinways were a safe investment 30, 40 years ago.
The best explanation for that is when you have a young family come in and say, what is the best investment of piano for our family? And the truest answer you can tell them is, well, if you're really looking at, you want to own a Steinway, the best time to buy one is buy a brand new one right now when no one in your house knows how to play it. And that way there you're guaranteed to get the maximum amount of use and benefit out of that instrument over you and your entire family's lifetime. Because if you wait 40 years, well then you can already play 40 years and they cost 40 years more expensive. So buy it now, even though you don't know how to play it. That's a big carrot to go out there and play. But to get the most amount of money out of your investment, you would have to have it the maximum amount of time and use.
But what if there's a nice used one right there?
Well, see, now that's where you can cut a lot of financial corners right there.
Well, so again, it's this narrative, and if you do any research, and just to be devil's advocate, there's a million reasons to buy a Steinway, and they all have dollar signals next to them. But there's such great options out there. And if you'd be doing a disservice if you didn't at least compare it.
Absolutely.
And so there's plenty of places to go and find a used Steinway. It's harder to find a new one and to play on them. But yeah, again, it's investment dollars how. And so are you looking to get usage out of, like a car? When you buy a brand new car, you take the biggest hit right off the lot. And what's the value? Is the value what it's going to be worth to me? Is the investment, what it's going to be worth to me in 10 years? Or is the investment the journey of 10 years? Right. And so I think that's kind of the way you got to think about these things, especially when you're thinking of a piano as this is my investment into my family. And so a lot of people, especially with Steinways, are like, if I buy one of these, is it just going to appreciate? There's a great story. There's an older gentleman that knew my grandfather and was talking. It was like, there's Rolls Royce, there's Rolex, and there's Steinway, and none of them are very good investments, but I own all 3. And it's just, again, it's one of those things that. This is a status. We're going back.
Status quo. This is a top of the line. The status quo.
This is a status thing to have a Steinway and to have it in your house. And so, just looking at your options and not thinking of it as, hey, I'm gonna score big on a big investment in a Steinway, but that these are quality instruments.
Right.
And so, yeah, we wanted to talk about the lines. Number 8 on our list was to talk about the grand piano options you do have with a Steinway, because that is the most common piano. They do have a player piano that just kind of came back around in 2015. There is a history of player pianos with Steinway in the 1920s. There was a scroll.
Yeah, the scroll type.
You can find some really old Steinways with that piano scroll in there. But they didn't do any player pianos for a very long time, and then reintroduced the Spirio in 2015, a very, very expensive player system that plays high quality, amazing featured artists right in your home playing on a Steinway, all controlled through an app. We've done some videos on player systems, so check those out for sure. But Spirio is Steinway's version, and that's moderately recent in the last 5 to 6 years here in 2020. But yeah, so know your line. So in the grand line, there's a whole bunch of different letters. And Ted, you probably know them better than me, but there's I feel 2 series. There's the Baby Grand series, which is going to be historically it was S, M, and L for the majority of the last 100 years. But that L was discontinued, I think, in 2005, and they do an O now. So the O is also something that they had pre-1940s.
It's a very old design that they brought back and updated on the model.
And so the S, M, and L, I always thought of it as small, medium, large. I don't know if they purposely did that, but it was the Steinway. These are in the Baby Grand things inside of things. So the S was a 5'1", the M was a 5'7", the L was a 5'10" and 3/4. With the O is about the same size. It falls right under 6 feet, which I think they push as the narrative. This is a Baby Grand line. Anything from under 5 feet to about 6 feet is going to be a Baby Grand. So that's your S, M, and O. When you get to the A, B, and D, there's no C anymore. But those are going to be those fuller size Grands. We've done a video. We actually compared a B to a Yamaha C7 to a Shigeru Kawai SK7. So check out that video too. But the B is a very highly sought after. It's a 6'11". The A is a 6'4".
I believe that's right.
And the D
other one
is
the
the
9 foot.
The 9
The
footer.
9 foot. And you know, I think we've always received more phone calls and more inquiries and a lot more results from calling players and teachers when we have a Model B. A Model D doesn't always bring people out. And I think the idea behind that is when you call them a Model B, they're thinking, that's more affordable than a Model D, which they don't even ask the price on. People think, a 9 foot Steinway, way too big for my house, not just the receipt, but not just the expenditure, it's just a big instrument. But a Model B is scaled to be, that's the one piano that a lot of artists and teachers and professors, they call. If there's one for sale, they're going to come in and check it out.
Yeah, and so know your series, know which Grand you are looking for, which one you can fit in your house. There's a whole bunch of them, and there's a lot of information online. I think you see a lot of Model Ls out there, especially I would say there's a lot of As too, but those are the ones that kind of fit in people's houses a little bit better.
Right.
And they kind of have room for that 5'10" to 6'2". So know your models. And then we also want to talk about who owns Steinway. So our next point is, who really owns Steinway?
I thought it was a conglomerate group that got together and bought.
It's a whole big old paragraph online if you want to read about the ownership of Steinway and who owns majority. But it's sold in the last couple of years. So it's one of those things to keep an eye on because the last 2 buyers were banks.
Right.
And one of them took the company private off the market, and they took it to a private company, and they paid over, I think it was like $500 million, some crazy amount of money. But it's interesting to look at them buying it as a brand and buying it as future potentials.
Right.
And just incredible to see what's happening with a piano manufacturer when you don't historically think of banks buying piano names.
Right.
So that's our number 9, and then just real quick, number 10, where are all these Steinways going? So they're creating a whole bunch of Steinways today, and the piano buyer is slowly going like this for the last couple years in the United States, but thankfully in China and in Asia, it's going up. So I read something similar there was less than 100,000 new piano players in the entire world, excluding China, and then there's 400,000 in China.
Wow.
And so a lot of these Steinways are going directly to China. And they have the fastest growing middle class. So it's kind of cool to see how Steinway grew with America for many, many, many years. And these really good piano players would be like, if you're ever good enough, son, I'll buy you a Steinway. If you're ever good enough, daughter, I'll buy you a Steinway. And you're seeing that a little bit more. And so, bold prediction, I think at some point Steinway might sell to somebody overseas. And that's one of my...
possibility.
And so just to keep an eye on that. But again, Steinway is one of those bigger than life names. And When you play them, you hear how incredibly detailed they were and how a lot of these patents are carried all the way until today. They don't do a lot of innovation anymore, I would say, that with the exception of the Spirio.
Right.
I would say they still make the Steinway the way they have made the Steinway, and it's been a good instrument.
Consistently, I mean, there's been a couple of more than 2 or 3 generations of employees at Steinway that have been there, or their uncles or grandparents were there, and that's how they just kind of fell into the same kind of work. It's a really interesting concept, especially among the employee base, and how long that they've been working there.
Yeah.
It's kind of an amazing thing to read. That's another thing that comes out in that book, and I believe there is that Netflix special that is taken from that book where you follow, it's Harry Connick and someone else, and they follow a Steinway from birth all the way through to the stage.
Wow, very neat. Check that out online, guys. But again, thank you for watching. This is our second video in the series. We're going to continue to do this series on piano brands. We really love doing the history, looking at things that you should be looking at on what you need to know before buying the brand. And so today we looked at Steinway. We do have Kawai. I think we're going to tackle Yamaha next, so be on the lookout for that video. We're Alamo Music Center in San Antonio, Texas. This is Ted Barcelou. I'm Patrick Marr. Thank you guys for watching.